Good afternoon, friends and colleagues. I'm the buffer zone between the boss and you. According to Kate, the boss is coming next. I'm Zeinab Badawi, and it's my great pleasure to be the moderator of this half-hour session when we will be hearing the keynote speech from the Director General of the BBC, Tony Hall. And of course, we saw from that session just how the media landscape, of course, is transforming because of AI and technology in ways which are as yet unimaginable and unfathomable, but it has already changed, of course, tremendously, which means that people like Tony are grappling with where does the BBC sit in all this kind of shift in the media landscape, the shift in content providers, the shift in new funding models and so on. So Tony, please come to the lectern to tell us just what your thoughts are on this and how you're going to be tackling all that.
Thank you.
Tony Hall, thank you.
A big agenda. Hello, good afternoon. In 1995, Bill Gates published a book on how he saw the future of digital technology. How would the personal computer revolution change things? But there was a problem. After writing The Road Ahead, before it reached the bookstores, he realized he'd got it wrong. Well, perhaps not exactly wrong, but he appreciated that in mapping the road ahead, he hadn't properly accounted for the internet. In 1996, when the paperback edition appeared, the book had a new subtitle, quotes, completely revised and up to date. And in that same book appears Gates's famous quote, "We always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. And my message today is a simple one. None of us can afford to do that now. There's too much at stake. The fundamentals of our business have been changing so rapidly, and the long-term consequences are so profound that for all the accolades we might get for today's programs or tomorrow's schedules, that's not what we will all be remembered for. What we will be judged on is how well we understood that big shift and how well we responded to it. That shift is already happening. We're debating it here. You know all about it. But it's worth taking a moment to reflect on how much is changing. Here are two central facts. First fact, global media giants have created new definitions of market scale. 10 years ago, when the App Store first launched, not a single member of Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, or Google were among the top 30 most valuable companies in the world. Fast forward to now, 10 years, and that group of 5 has increased in value by about $3 trillion. All but one is now ranked in the top 10 of the most valuable companies in the world. Second fact, audiences have changed. Bodyguard may have us all on the edge of our seats, but for young British audiences, Netflix is now roughly the same size as Channel 4 and close to the size of BBC Television and iPlayer together. Music streaming is getting bigger and bigger, and that's partly why listening to live radio across the whole industry is down by around 20% in the last 10 years. And underpinning both of these is technological change. Changes in communication, technology, changes in computer storage, changes in interfaces, changes in the size and shape and price of devices. Does anyone think these changes are going to stop, or more important, slow? And the questions answer themselves. This big shift is already upon us, and we've got to run with it. This is both an opportunity and a challenge, as we've been hearing this morning. The opportunity is obvious. You can see it already. For people who use media, and that's basically everyone, this is a remarkable time. On screen, choice has never been so spectacular. Every day brings new ways of producing, distributing, and enjoying content. And the same is true for audio. So as I say, the opportunity is obvious. But so is the challenge. Not just to us as an industry, but more broadly to society. Let's start with this. There may be more content, but it won't necessarily be British content. Here's how much Netflix is spending this year on content: $8 billion. Here's how much Amazon is spending: $5 billion. And here's how much Britain's public service broadcasters together are spending on new programmes: £2.5 billion, all of us together. And while the giant spending is going up, ours is going down. In those 10 years when this big shift was getting going, Ofcom's data shows that the public service broadcasters reduced their annual spending on new British content by around £700 million a year in real terms. And if you go back to 2004, the fall is around £1 billion amongst us all. As the BBC has been forced to spend less because of a cut in the licence fee, so the other PSBs, for different reasons, have spent less too. And Netflix and Amazon are not making up the difference. Ofcom's data suggests that less than 10% of the Netflix and Amazon catalogues are composed of content produced in the UK. And two separate recent estimates have suggested their investment into new UK programmes is around £150 million a year. Co-production has helped to make up the difference for a while, but these deals are becoming more rare and tougher. You can argue about the size of the future gap, but there's no doubt there is a gap today in funding public service broadcasting, and there's going to be one in the future. This isn't just an issue for us economically, commercially, or as institutions. There is an impact on society. The content we all produce is not just an ordinary consumer good. It helps shape our society. It brings people together. It helps us understand each other and creates an incredibly powerful shared narrative. And people feel that deeply. They want content that is relevant to their lives, and they want to see people like them on the screen. And we all know this instinctively, but if we didn't, Ofcom data shows it very, very clearly. So how will we be able to feed this hunger as the big shift develops? We can't expect the global media giants to do so. That's not how they work, and it's not what they're there to do. So this is a challenge we have to meet ourselves. We can, and we will do. Then there is the challenge that with all the key changes in technology come new social problems. We can see some of it already. We've been speaking about it this morning. Fake news, online disinformation, online bullying, for that matter, has not made our society better. And in country after country across the world, we see compelling evidence of direct manipulation of our democracies and a deliberate undermining of traditional truths and values. Finally, there is this. Britain's media output is a source of soft power and global persuasion. And we're going to need it more than ever at a moment where we are reshaping our relations with the rest of the world. We are a beacon for liberty and democracy and truth that shines bright. It can and must shine as brightly in the future. So this then, for all of us, is the opportunity and the challenge. And I see grasping both as the big test and the big chance for all of us, but especially the BBC. The media world has changed so much since 1922, when the BBC was founded. There are so many magnificent alternatives and brilliant partners. There's so much wonderful diversity and choice. There's so much worthy competition and spurs to innovation. The BBC is no longer alone. It belongs to a community of talent and drive. It has many good neighbours and tries itself to be a good neighbour. But the BBC is funded by the public, and that gives it, us, a special role in this community and a special responsibility, and one which I think will become increasingly important, not less. We have a duty to provide trusted, impartial news and information about the UK and the world. We have a special duty to make programmes and services about British people and British culture. And we have a duty to do this for everyone, because in a democracy, Everyone should have the right to share in the best our culture has to offer. The front row, the best seat, the finest programs and services, the most trusted news for everyone. And I'll repeat those last words, for everyone. This is what public funding allows us to do, to bring the best to each and every one of us. Because we're funded by everyone, we have a duty to serve everyone. Take these things together and it becomes clear what the BBC can offer this country in terms of response to the big changes, the big shifts that are going on, and how the BBC needs to continue to develop and adapt in order to be effective in these new circumstances. We start with the scale and the breadth, the expertise and the ambition to make a realistic response to the growth of the global giants. But here are the conditions of success. We must remain true to our mission. We must have the funding that allows us to respond effectively, and we must be able to innovate as audiences change. Our response must be to accelerate our work in 5 key areas. First, we'll have to spend more on the highest quality content. We cannot allow any further narrowing of the range of distinctive British content. Bodyguard, 3 Girls, Mother's Day, I could go on. Tell stories that are important and connected to our audiences in this country. Second, we need to keep reinventing our services. I spoke to our teams last week, and Grace mentioned it, about a major reshaping of BBC Online. At present, we are number 3 in the UK, and I want to keep it that way. It's the only UK website in the top 5, and perhaps most telling of all, and this is really important, it's the only one in the top 5 that's powered by its own content. And that's why we're focusing on just building 8 world-class services in that environment. We're transforming iPlayer from a catch-up service to a destination for long-form, short-form, and live. And we're changing the way I hope we will all consume radio with a new audio service, BBC Sounds, to replace iPlayer Radio to give you easier access to the great British content that we make. Third, we must invest more, and are doing, in children and young adults. We need to safeguard the future of public service broadcasting for coming generations. Today, we've been hearing again this morning, young audiences believe in public service broadcasting like all audiences do. They believe in the BBC's mission. And actually, we reach more than 80% of young adults every week, and we are their largest provider of media. They use us for around 8 hours a week. But the nearest media providers, next down from us, are Spotify and YouTube at over 4 hours each. And this means that the time that young audiences spend with the BBC has, as with other organisations, fallen in recent years. In TV, it's fallen from well over 5 hours a week 8 years ago to around 3 hours now, and in radio from 6.5 hours a week to around 4.5 now. But we know that with the right content and the right services, we can introduce a new generation to the enduring values of what public service broadcasting at the BBC, but more broadly too, can offer. And that's why, for example, we put an extra £34 million into content for children. Fourth, we must help counter threats to democracy globally, and these are real. The plague of disinformation and fake news needs to be challenged not just in the UK, but around the world too. And I believe we need a strong BBC to push against fake news and hold those who produce it, here or abroad, to account. BBC News is trusted across the globe, and sustaining and building on this has to be a priority for our country. Finally, and I think most significantly, the BBC should spend more outside London. I take great pride that already over 50% of our teams and our spend on commissioning is outside of London. But to truly reflect the whole of the UK in our output, the BBC not only needs to invest more, it needs to do so outside the M25. And that will mean more of our money being spent around England and the nations, and more of our staff will be located outside London. The BBC's move to Salford is a game changer. It's wonderful. 10 years on, the success of Media City is something we need to build on. All this is what we can do for Britain, and it's what the public expects from us: distinctive programmes and products that reflect their experiences and outlook on life, made available and relevant to everyone, whoever you are, of all ages and all demographics. But while we believe that the BBC's public mission is as important as ever, and that we can do more for Britain, we don't believe this ambition is sustainable with the resources we have. You know this stuff. High-quality production costs, and it costs millions. A decade ago, premium high-end drama might have cost £1 million an hour in today's money. Premium drama today costs many times that figure, routinely. And this has resulted in the BBC needing to spend significantly more just to stand still. Reinventing our services will also cost more. We need to continue to invest in technology and product development. People now expect to be able to watch programmes when they want over a long period of time. To keep up with audience expectations, we'll need to increase the availability of our content from 30 days to months or possibly even in years. These challenges are facing our partners and competitors as well. I appreciate that. But these pressures are really intense for the BBC. We have been through a long period of holding back and cutting back. The BBC has made its contribution as the nation sought to get itself back on track financially. But now, is the country going to seize the moment and adapt and invest in the face of what's going on, or are we just going to sit there and let it wash over us? Doing nothing is a decision that may look fine tomorrow or the day after. But in 2 years' time, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, it may look more like a grand national error. Because across the same 10 years that the internet giants took over the world, what the BBC can spend from the licence fee on its UK services has been cut by a fifth, £800 million, in real terms. It's the consequence of a decade of top slicing and then freezing the licence fee for 7 years and then more top slicing. In real terms, that's meant that nearly £500 million has gone from our annual budget for new TV programmes, in real terms. Now, for a period, we were able to manage through self-help and efficiency. For a decade, we have saved the equivalent of 4.5% a year every single year. And that track record is, I believe, extraordinary. We now spend just 6% of our controllable costs on running the organisation. And an independent report we're publishing shortly puts us in the top quartile of media companies and regulated organisations in the UK. It's a testament to the care and hard work of our teams, all our teams, that we've been able to cope with reduced funding while continuing to deliver great programmes and services. It means that the BBC continues to be enormously good value for money. Each hour of BBC TV watched by a household costs that household, 8 pence. 8 pence. For an equivalent SVOD service, that's around 17 pence. And for an equivalent pay TV service, it starts at 35 pence an hour. 8 pence, 17, 35. It's a similar story for audio. Each hour of BBC radio listening costs each household about 2 pence. For ad-free music on streaming services, it's around 10 pence. But the cracks are beginning to show. More cuts have been taking place over a far longer period than any other in the BBC's history. It led to the closure of BBC Three as a broadcast channel and a £30 million cut from its content budget. It's meant the loss of Formula One coverage, the sharing of Six Nations tournament. Great programmes have been decommissioned or lost to other broadcasters purely to meet savings targets. I mean, we could, of course, continue to do less, but the public don't like cuts to BBC services. It's their BBC, and they want more from us, not less. And as I've been arguing, if we do less, the creative economy as a whole suffers. Instead, I believe, the BBC needs to reinvest to sustain our mission and purposes, to do more for Britain and British audiences. So while we believe the BBC's public mission is as important as ever, we do not believe what we currently do is sustainable with the resources we have. For the BBC to do the most for Britain and the most good for the British public, Britain needs to support the BBC. Of course, we must help ourselves first. We will continue to push further on efficiency and savings. We need to move faster on our plans for iPlayer, for BBC Sounds, for the young audiences. In fact, I've challenged the organisation to find £100 million a year from our content budgets to invest in these priorities from next April. And of course, we've got to cope with things like voice, as we've just been hearing. But all of this comes at a time when the BBC is also faced with taking on the full cost of free TV licenses for those over 75. And this has potential implications both for the BBC's funding and for licence holders. The concession, as it currently formulated, comes to an end in 2020, and the BBC board will have to consult on possible options and then decide. It could be the same, it could be different. There are a variety of options. But beyond the steps the BBC may take, Britain also needs to do more to support the broader PSB, public service broadcasting ecology. We have great relationships with ITV, Channel 4. We have great relationships with companies like Google and Apple. And it's important we work with them now and in the future. But it cannot be right that the UK's media industry is competing against global giants with one hand tied behind its back. In so many ways, prominence, competition rules, advertising, taxation, content regulation, terms of trade, production quotas. One set of rules applies to UK companies, and barely any apply to some of these new giants. And that needs rebalancing too, and we stand ready to help where we can. But the big picture is a simple one. The public believes in public service broadcasting and a strong BBC. I have huge confidence in our future. We know we can do so much more for Britain. Investment in great content that supports a creative economy, world-class online services, more for children and young adults, trust and accuracy in news, and more outside London. And to be clear, I am not among the doubters who say you can't compete against the might of these global giants. I believe the opposite. They have their job to do, their services to provide, and they're successful. We have ours. Scale is not everything. Smaller can be beautiful. And let's, in our own way, emulate Sir Francis Drake against an armada of competitors. Seems to be the theme of the day. Agile, creative, bold, taking risks, backing talent, passionate for what we believe in. Yes, the big shift is happening, but with the right backing, we can win. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tony. Please do ask some questions. Think about what you want to ask Tony. We've only got about 8 minutes. But Tony, you said there the cracks are beginning to show, that what we're doing now at the BBC is not sustainable if we don't get the funding. Do you worry that the BBC, as we know it, faces an existential threat?
No, I don't believe in existential threats at all. But I think there's a threat. And I think there's also a huge opportunity here. And what I hope we can have is a proper debate about the value of the public sphere in broadcasting, as indeed the public sphere in other areas as well, what the BBC can offer, and actually, I think more broadly in that, what the BBC, alongside ITV, alongside Channel 4, can also offer the British public. Because I never tire of saying, this is a remarkably strong television ecology, or broadcasting ecology we have in this country, and I think we need to recognise that, and we need to make sure we strengthen that, because it is about bigger things than economics and finances and EBITDA. It is actually about who we are and what we are and how we talk to each other and how we come together to discuss, to laugh, to be entertained or whatever. I think we underestimate the power of television and its importance to our culture at our peril.
But a large premise of what she said was based on the fact that as a national broadcaster, the BBC can cater for a British audience and give them British, content with which they can identify and so on. But what is to stop the big global giants parking their tanks packed with dollars on that particular lawn? The indie, companies are flourishing in the UK, and go to them and say, for not very much money for them,
yeah,
do the same.
That's a threat. That's what we've got to work with. But what I'm saying is, if we use our imaginations, if we use our talent, if we look for new talent, if we look for new ideas, if we back things that they would not do but are really important for this country, I think we've got a future. So look, take Three Girls from last year, which I thought was an extraordinary piece. I honestly can't see that. I mean, much as I appreciate what Amazon and Netflix do, I cannot see that being funded by them. I think we've got to, together, take many more risks, back new talent, and back the storytelling abilities we have, either in fiction, non-fiction, or whatever it happens to be in this country. And I think there's a role for that, because if you're running a Netflix or an Amazon or indeed an Apple, you're going to be looking for those big things which, okay, will have an impact in the UK market, but will really have a big impact globally. And I think there's so many things that we can do within this market to reflect the culture of the BBC, of Britain, the creativity of Britain, all sorts of things, which actually I think if we just concentrate on that, we've got a future. I go back, small can be beautiful.
Sure. I mean, I obviously work at BBC World TV and BBC World Service Radio, so I'm very conscious of the global audience on the programmes I work on, Hard Talk and Global Questions, which is the kind of international version of Question Time. What's to stop the BBC making, I mean, I agree, Three Girls is not the kind of thing that would sell internationally, but The Crown, that kind of series, is something which would appeal both to British audiences and an international audience, will bring the BBC,
I think The Crown's great. I've enjoyed The Crown.
But we're not specifically that.
No,
but just that kind of thing.
But the point is, there's going to be a lot of very, very
audiences.
high-end and stuff which is costing a lot of money, where occasionally we may be able to compete, but broadly we can't. So we've got to say, all right, let's accept that. For the cost of The Crown, we've produced, I think, about 70 hours worth of drama. I think, if I remember rightly, 13 series. And that's what we've got to do. Quit, cope with the fact some talent is going to go off to Netflix and Amazon because they've got very deep pockets, and Apple now as well. You've got to recognise that. But we shouldn't be defeatist about it. We should be using all our ingenuity. And when I talk to people, plenty of ideas, plenty of ingenuity. We've just got to back that.
All right. Couple of comments, perhaps, from the floor. Can I see any hands? Any hands? One there, please, if you could get the microphone swiftly. And there was another one behind him, the gentleman with the spectacles at the back. Is there another microphone for him? I'll take two together. Yes, please, go ahead.
Hi, Tony. Chris Curtis from Broadcast. I'm going to try and sneak two questions in very, very quickly. They will be brief. Question one is, I'm trying to unpack what you just said, and I think that you're asking for the opportunity for the BBC to be able to raise more money itself. That seems to be something that I'm taking from that one, if you can comment on that. And the other thing I'd like to ask you about is, BBC One spends about £1 billion on content a year. BBC Two spends £370 million on content a year. BBC Three spends £40 million on content a year. You talk a lot about the need to do more for young audiences. What can we expect for BBC Three's budget and for content specifically designed for young viewers?
Okay, and the question at the back, chap with the spectacles.
Thanks. Thanks. Tony, and it's Gidon Freeman from NBC Universal.
Just introduce yourself very quickly.
Sorry, Gidon from NBC Universal. Tony, in your remarks trailed in the newspapers over the last day or two, you talked a little bit more about the kind of regulatory burden that applies to the BBC and the PSBs as against that for the streamers. You didn't mention it today. Have you had a change of heart, or was it an oversight?
Okay, let's take that one just now.
Okay,
first.
the regulation.
Yep.
I did actually at the end,
You did.
but maybe I was going too fast or something. I don't know what I did. No, I said I think there should be a level playing field. Look, there are issues such as misinformation. The DCMS Select Committee produced a fantastic report, interim report on this in June or July, which I was reading. I think we need to have a debate about that. I think we need to have a debate about protection for kids, for example. But also, if you want to have a healthy PSB ecology where ourselves, ITV, Channel 4, etc., are competing on, then actually it does seem to me worthy of a debate about how you ensure that you don't have a highly regulated, really highly regulated group of us, and then a much less regulated tier, followed by almost no regulation at all beyond there. As a country, as a nation, we should be debating that and discussing that, and I think Sharon will probably say something about that later on, which is good. So that's my view. I haven't gone back at it. But what I really don't want, this is not poking at people, it's simply saying, look, we should debate these things and decide as a nation what we think. These are very important.
All right, and then you had a question
so
about
the question
funding.
About funding, do we want to
internally.
raise more money? I'm making the point that we need to find more money, yes. And I'm saying that could come from a variety of different sources, because we've never had a proper debate about the funding of the... It's always been, it's too big, cut it. That's when Mark Thompson was in charge. He had a raid on him. I famously had a raid with George Osborne. We've never had the space to say, okay, what is the right level of funding for the BBC and what does the public actually expect of that? And I think we need to have that debate.
Going to have a problem with the over 75 licence, which you touched on there.
That will come up over the autumn and winter, the border working their way through that now. And BBC Three, I absolutely love BBC Three content. I think Damien does a fantastic job with BBC Three. It's wonderful watching Killing Eve, which I'm enjoying. at the moment. There is so much more for BBC Three to do. What I want to do is to see BBC Three in a place of real prominence when using data and that if I'm under 35, when I come to the front page of iPlayer, that's where I find BBC Three content. We need to do so much more to get BBC content out there because it's really, really good, and I think the team do a fantastic job.
You talked about the demographic clock ticking and how you've got to appeal more and more to
whilst
younger
at the same
audiences.
time,
Yeah.
we shouldn't lose, I'm not saying this because I'm silver-haired, but actually you shouldn't lose the fact that people of all ages want to consume more, and you know that we can't lose them either. So you know you're doing.
But you said you're under pressure.
Yeah.
As the mother of 4 children, 2
Yes.
sons, 2 daughters, between 18 and 23,
Yeah.
I agree with you. I can see my own little focus group that they do consume television in a very, very different way from the older generation. I'm sure for a small fee that they will submit to a series of tests for you, if you like. Tony.
What was interesting during the charter actually was how we actually put people who didn't want to pay the license fee through a test and said we'll take the BBC off you, and actually for a fortnight I think it was, or was it a week? I can't remember now. And what was really interesting is 7 out of the 8 people who had no BBC content for that time said we actually need it. And by the way, we didn't realise that came from the BBC.
They all love The Bodyguard, by the way. What happens in the last episode? Do you know? Have you seen it?
I really cannot say what happens on Sunday night, but isn't Jed Mercurio
It's
just
fabulous.
fab?
And the
by the way,
youngsters like it
and
too.
Line of Duty is coming back as well. It's being shot at the moment in Belfast, so it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Tony, thank you so much indeed for
Pleasure.
telling us about, despite all the competition, how there is clearly a big role for major public service broadcaster like the BBC, and long may Auntie flourish. Thank you very much indeed. You're going to have lunch now, same place where you had coffee. Please reconvene by 2 o'clock to listen to Carolyn McCall, the Chief Executive of ITV. It's been my pleasure being with you. Enjoy the rest of the RTS. Thank you.